All right, is this thing on? All right, well, I hate to tell you, I picked the wrong day to have a title slide that, let's see if I can get this thing to work right. Probably the wrong car. That being said, good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Macholz, and I want to thank Greg and the team here at ETI for the invitation to present to you all this morning. I've had the privilege of being in the automotive industry pretty much my entire life. Someone asked me recently, I think it was just yesterday, how did you get involved in the automotive industry? And as many of you probably did, I had someone in my family that was close to me. It was my grandfather, who worked for probably a familiar company, little company called Snap-on Tools, when I was a kid. And so I grew up around cars. And a couple of pivotal things happened to me as a young person that I think a lot of young people coming into the industry are experiencing. At 15 years old, I got my first job at a gas station. Soon thereafter, the man, John, that owned the business, gave me the opportunity to go into the shop. And the shop wasn't a strange thing to me. Grandpa had a 64.5 Mustang convertible, worked on all sorts of things in the garage, played with tools. I rode around with him on the tech truck as a kid, learning how to, you guys remember the red brick Snap-on tool, right? With the cartridges and whatnot. So, just great experiences. But one thing that really stood out to me and was sort of a pivotal piece that pushed me to even where I am today was when my grandfather, my parents, they said, "What are you going to do after high school, Dave?" And I said, "Well, I think I'm doing it. I love cars. I'm in this industry. I'd like to just pursue, what I'm doing. I want to stay at the gas station." And they said, "No." Right? Why did they say no? Right? I loved this industry. It was something that I wanted to do. It was someplace where I wanted to be. And that's stuck with me throughout my entire career in automotive education. So to give you a little bit of a background, I got into teaching accidentally after pursuing a degree in music, right, of all things, right? Went to school for that. Went to Queens College within the University of New York system and studied trombone with the second trombone player in the New York Philharmonic. Guess how I made a living while I was in college? In the automotive industry, right? While my friends were playing weddings for $25, right? I was home making $250, right, for a day, right, working in a shop. So long story short, that stuck with me. Why did my grandfather and the people that were in the industry not want me to go into it? And I'll kind of walk through that here this morning. So accidentally got into education in 2009, but really had the privilege to work with some amazing programs at Suffolk County Community College, which is the largest college in the SUNY system, or I should say largest community college in the SUNY system, where we had GM ACEP, Toyota T10, and Honda PACT as our flagship partners. And over the last 7 or 8 years or so, we had added Mopar Cap, Ford Ace, Subaru University, Nissan Technician Training Academy, Mercedes-Benz Campus, and we were one of the first 6 Tesla Star programs in the country. So we really built an amazing, solid program with industry. And the other thing that we got to do is we got to see a lot about what worked in different OEM programs, right? Many schools will have 1 or 2 of these programs. We had 9 at the same time. So we saw what worked, what didn't work. And one of the relationships I built over the years was with the T10 program. I was very involved in that. And that's been pivotal in some of the development that we've come across with AVTECC. If you guys have seen my name before, it may be from the education space, but it's also been because I've been a subject matter expert. I've worked with a company called WorldPAC. I don't know if Rob Morell's in the audience, but had the pleasure of working with him for the last 10 years or so, doing technical training for WTI, and have also written for Motor Age magazine, mostly on the topic of, did a lot with Toyota, Honda, and also early on hybrid and now currently electric vehicles. So where I've gone in my career was, okay, what do I want to do when I grow up? So I got into teaching. The only way to move up within a college system is to get more education. Got my master's degree in higher education administration. And about 4 years ago, decided to pursue my PhD. on workforce development and education. And the first summer of that program was summer of 2021. And Dr. Mickey Kozlowski, who runs the program at Old Dominion University, said to me, "What's your research topic going to be?" He said, "What sticks out to you in the world of education that you live in, right, that is something that you want to write a 200-page paper about?" Right? So I thought back to some of those early feelings that I had about the industry and how Grandpa sort of talked me out of it. But I also thought about the experiences I was having as a dean, where I would meet with, on average, 300 or 400 students annually and their parents that were interested in going into the field. And parts of where we live on Long Island are affluent, right? Parents are doctors, lawyers, all sorts of different professional careers. And one of the first things they would ask me is, what type of an industry is my son or daughter getting into? Right? So talk about that emotional learning of Grandpa in that conversation 15 years before. I wanted to better understand how we position the automotive field as a profession, right? Not necessarily a trade where you're going to go in and it's dead-ended, right? But what are the experiences and what are the possibilities for students that are going through our programs as we develop them to build their careers, right? Not enter the field as $15 or $16 an hour oil changers, but provide a pathway for them. So the research topic I decided to pursue was understanding the relationship between certification and earnings potential. Right? And better understanding if we do a better job of professionalizing what we're doing with the young people that are coming into our industry, does that have an effect on their lifetime earnings? So a couple of things came up as we looked through this, and one of the things that stick out, really egregiously is, how many of you all have heard about a technician shortage? Right? How many think there is actually a technician shortage? Not as many, right? How many have heard about attrition in the automotive industry? Right? And what are those numbers that we hear? 40 to 60% in the first 3 years of employment. I talked to one OEM recently, the number was as much as 75%, right? How do we sustain that, folks, as an industry, right? What's happening to the people that are coming into our industry that makes them, in the first 3 years of employment, want to leave and feel like they made a bad decision, right? So that was the sort of preliminary basis for understanding, okay, how do we fix this? Anybody know what the median salary it is right now in the automotive industry for technicians? If you know it, call it out. $22 an hour, probably somewhere around there. Annually, it's like 48,000, right? Median, right? What does that mean? We just had a data scientist up here. Median means middle, right? So that means in a population of 800,000 people, half of them make $48,000 or less. How many of you could live on $48,000 here today? Right? How many of your sons or daughters can enter an industry making less than $48,000 a year and afford an apartment, a car, insurance, food, right? There's something that's called the living wage, right? So you can see where I was going with this problem. The other thing that I saw was that the wage return for occupational credentials, right, across all industries, right? So voluntary certification. If I go out and I certify myself, right? What does that return to? So that's as much as 14 to 25% for certification holders across all industries. So we know that certification is effective, right? Especially voluntary certification. Similarly to how if I invest in myself and get a 4-year degree, get a master's degree, and a doctorate, what happens? The line of income follows that investment in yourself, right? So one of the things that I also realized when we started to look at a lot of these statistics was that the initial effect of the certification for a career entrant was the most powerful point, right, for that career entrant. So that really suggests that what we need to do is do a really good job of making sure that the people that are entering our industry are gaining credentials while they're with us in educational programs and leaving with credentials that they can signal to their employer that they're valuable, right? And that value, according to Burning Glass Institute, who recently did a report, ASE is, believe it or not, among the top 5 subscribed voluntary certifications in the world, right? It's up there with Microsoft and some others. You might be surprised to find that out. They found that there's as much as a $9,500 positive effect for career entrance, meaning that career entrants can command more money entering the field. Right? But something very interesting happened as I was looking at my data. And some of that data spoke to the fact that after that initial effect, getting more certifications, what did it do to those folks' income? Or what did it do to the perception of employers, right, for those people that got more certification? It flattened. Right? So there's 2 dissertations that looked at employer perceptions of ASE certified technicians versus non-certified technicians. And most of them said the certification didn't matter at that point. What they said was what the technician could do was what mattered. So a couple things that have come to mind and things that pop up, right? We have a need for 68,000 technicians annually, right? There's only about 50,000 annually in the pipeline, right, which leaves us with a shortage. There's a talent brain drain happening. If you look at the 2012 ASE statistics on how many folks in the industry held at least one certification, that number was 274,182. Today, it's 172,731. That's a huge drop-off, folks. And I understand maybe there's some OEM considerations there. The OEMs may not consider ASE certification as a pathway. But if this is indicative of where we are going as a workforce, we got a problem, because what's happening to technology? It's advancing considerably, right? We just saw that in the last presentation and throughout the week here. The other problem we have is it seems like we're going in the wrong direction in terms of technicians, right? Our preparation pipeline, we have another problem. For the most part, secondary level schools are not offering professional level ASEs, nor should they, likely. Right? But post-secondary programs are not required to measure the take-it-pass rate of the ASE exam. Right? So that can be mildly problematic because we don't know how we're doing as educators if we don't have the feedback of a formalized assessment while students are in our programs. So in other words, okay, you go through a 2-year associate's degree program, you get to the end, right? There's no measurement. How do I address educationally improving my process as an educator and improving the outcomes that I have? Even the student level models of assessment that we have are somewhat misaligned. There's also been a dialogue recently that has come out in trade publications and things like that with this sort of perception that the schools are not producing the technicians that they need to. Right? I can tell you as an educator and as a person that works with educators, that's a gut punch, right? These people are working hard to educate technicians. 125,000 students annually in accredited programs and only 50,000 graduates, as we mentioned. Professional certification achievement percentage on industry assessments, we don't really know because we're not measuring it. But the anecdotal evidence suggests that it's poor. Right? We also have a duplication of effort between high school and college programs. So some of the parents that would come in and they'd say, Dave, you know, why should Johnny or Susie take this program? They just spent 2 years studying the same thing, right, at so-and-so vocational school. What am I telling them? I'd say, yeah, you're right. Well, what's the difference? Well, you get a degree at the end. Well, does the degree matter to the industry? Depends. See where I'm headed. Right? We also have a one-size-fits-all approach. Right? In 1972, ASE was established to essentially avoid technician licensing, right, by providing a voluntary certification model, right? And it worked pretty well, right? There were 3 vehicle manufacturers that made up 95% of the technology at that time. And at that time, you probably had a 6-cylinder, an 8-cylinder, and what were the differences in those 6-cylinder and the 8-cylinder? Firing order, where the distributor was, right? Some other minor details and differences, but you could generalize a test. How many models of EV did we have last year come onto the market? Does anybody know? Like 122, something like that? A little bit of a shot in the dark there, but I think it's close to that. How do you write a test around 122 different models? The answer is you can't, right? So this brings up essentially why we developed AVTECC. We founded AVTECC just a year ago, back in February of 2024, with the goal of reimagining automotive education and credentialing. When I speak about AVTECC, people say, well, what are you doing? I say, we're reimagining what we're doing. We're taking the pieces of what we have, dumping them out on the table and say, let's put this back together in a way that works for the 21st century, that meets students where they are, that helps employers identify the skills that they need from people coming out of the industry, and ultimately doing that based on strong research, both in the education sector and, as the gentleman that was just up here before, based on strong data, right? And that happens through the development of industry standards, right, which most of us are pretty familiar with. But really what we're seeing as a particular difference in our program is the measurement of technician skill, right? So when you talk about the reason why those manufacturers, or excuse me, those employers had perception issues with folks getting certifications and not seeing a difference between them, right? What did that come down to? It came down to the way that we were measuring, with the certification. So I'll give you sort of an anecdote to this. If I was going to train somebody to swim in the Olympics, right? How would I do that? Probably get a pool, Olympic-sized pool, right? And I'd say, here you go, here's how to do the backstroke. How would I measure their success? Would I put them in front of a computer and ask them to identify through multiple choice which one was the backstroke? Probably not, right? So when we talk about testing, right, in the certification community, performance-based testing has kind of been squashed. And it's been squashed because there's a lot of money in testing. There are 3 big companies that control almost all of the testing in the United States, right? And from a testing perspective, this is something the educational community has pushed back hard on. I recently attended a conference, Institute for Credentialing Excellence, and I was walking around and I was looking for apps to help support the development of our checklist system that we're implementing for performance-based certification. You know what someone told me? Although there's nobody here like that. I said, well, why is that? They said, well, every year that one of them pops up, one of those big 3 companies buys them and they go away. Why? There's a lot of money in testing, right? And that's pervasive throughout every single industry, right? But here's the reality. People, and not just in the automotive industry, are realizing that education has to tie to skill, right? You're hearing it talked about in the 4-year degree community, right? What are they talking about with the 4-year degree? Okay, Johnny comes out of, XYZ program at Hofstra University with his 4-year bachelor's degree, and he's going to go into a job in accounting. Well, do you know how to do accounting? Well, I was a business major. Well, what skills do you have, right? So there's even a question in the world of 4-year degrees as to what skills do people have, right? And if we're not measuring those skills and aligning those skills with workforce outcomes, what are we doing? We're sending a young person into the field, and what happens, right? Immediately it's, well, what's the school doing, right? And there's a couple different reasons for why that happens, but I think the main reason is we're not focused on performance-based skills assessment. We're not saying, hey, show me that you can do this. And that becomes particularly critical in safety-specific areas, right? And I'll touch on that here in a moment. The other piece we're working on is a new model for accreditation for schools. And the reason for that model for accreditation is not to necessarily reinvent or replace what's already out there, but because we need a framework for schools to be able to deliver performance-based certification, and we need to know that they're doing it in accordance with the standards that we've set, and doing it in a way that's going to be legally defensible, repeatable, valid, right? So that's something that we're working on rolling out in a pilot program here this year. So what is the basis of what we're doing? We are basically creating what we're calling micro-credentials, right? If you've heard that term before, if you're in education, it's a big term across all of education because we talk about micro-credentials as formative assessment versus summative assessment. And for those non-educators in here, basically what that means is formative assessment is assessment that happens at the end of something, right? Excuse me, summative assessment is something that happens at the end of something. So in other words, if I take, for example, an ASE exam after I'm done with a college program, that would be a summative assessment that's at the end of the program. What are the advantages and disadvantages of that? You get a measurement of how the student did, right, at the end. Big disadvantage is, what happens if they don't do well or don't take it at all, right? I have no way to go back and fix my educational process. So the certifications that we're designing are designed to be inserted into a program or even a course in a short format, right? So one of the things that's killed performance-based testing in the past is the length of the test, the difficulty in delivering it. We're delivering tests, for example, our new EV Safe certification, which is the first certification that we've rolled out, takes less than 30 minutes. So the idea is that you have formative assessment while the program is still happening. Now, this could happen at a high school, this could happen at a college, this could happen even at an OEM. Just last week, we were at Mazda North America. John Davison, who's the director for training for them, is on our board of directors. And we piloted this with instructors to get their feedback and insight on what we need to do to make this something that the industry utilizes and something that they want to utilize. So we see this being utilized in a number of different fashions. So eventually where this goes is to a stackable model. And if you look at something like EV, at the career entry and secondary level, we see this as a starting point for safety, and basically building on these with a series of different credentials. Many folks have asked us, where does ASE fit in this whole thing? We don't have an interest in creating cognitive exams. Our interest is specifically in the measurement of technician skill, right, which does have a cognitive component, right? So for an example, if I'm giving our new EV Safe certification, I'm asking a student or a technician to identify proper PPE. I'm asking them to validate it, right? When they make that selection, is that a cognitive decision? 100%, right? So you're testing people in a different way, probably in the way in which they work, right? It's the most real, or what we call in the testing world, it's high fidelity testing, right? The highest fidelity test, or the best way to measure something, is to measure people in the way they go to work. Technicians do not go to work and take multiple choice exams. Okay, so where does ASE fit? ASE is complementary to what we do, right? And if an organization is utilizing it, we see a way of where it fits. But again, if you look at just basic electrical here, on the bottom you have DC electricity, body electrical, wire connector repair, DC electronics, computers, and networking. Those are usually 4 different classes at OEMs. How many tests do we have from ASE for that? 1. Right? We see it as 4 separate tests, skills tests. We're also building these in a way where we're looking at the current curriculum maps for OEMs, right? There's no sense in building something that's not in alignment with what the industry is doing. And the plan in which and the reason for which we're doing that is the skills are uniform across all these programs, folks. The content might be different, right? Slightly different. But guess what? In every manufacturer's electrical class, what's in that electrical class? The first one, meters, voltage, amperage, voltage drop. The skills are identical, right? So we're building this into a framework where we will have the ability for manufacturers to understand what particular skills a technician has in each area. So when you talk about reciprocity, and what I mean by that, someone leaves a Toyota dealership, walks into a BMW dealership. What's one of the reasons that these people leave the industry? They walk into the BMW dealership, and what does the BMW dealership tell them about training? Well, you got to start over, son, because you haven't done the BMW way, right? You go, well, wait a second. What about all the skills that I learned and did over here? They go, well, there's no way for us to validate that. So from our perspective, this is something that is going to save OEMs money, right? Many OEMs in their training departments are spending the majority of their money on the 60% of the people that are leaving the industry in the first 3 years. If you look at Toyota's course offerings right now, their 206A class, which is an electrical class, they probably have about 50 of those running a week, right, across the US. How many high-level technical classes do you think they're running? Hell of a lot less, right? So we see this as a way to address also the reciprocity issue across brands. So what exactly is involved in creating a skills-based certification? I was fortunate enough to be introduced to a woman who has 50 years in the performance-based testing space, who has become a consultant for our program. And to tell you that this woman is a wealth of knowledge, she's been a godsend and has helped us walk this through and follow essentially ISO standards in building this. It takes you several years of having this up and running to be able to ISO credential this, but that's the plan. So in doing that, we have a board of directors, we have a governing board, and we've created subject matter expert panels that are involved in the creation of the job analysis. But rather than start from scratch and say, okay, well, what do technicians need to know? We've done our best to use AI, resources, and basically the body of knowledge that's already out there in terms of these content areas, pull them together, and create job task analyses from them, right? From there, we create content outlines that make it really, really simple for educators to plug this into their programs, whether that's at the secondary high school level or even professional level training, whether that's aftermarket or OEM. And involved in every single one of these is a Proctor checklist. And basically, what do you have to get to pass a skills-based test, right? How many of you would feel comfortable with someone fixing your electric vehicle, and let's say it's something in the 800-volt electrical system replacing a battery, if they got a 70 on the test that qualified them? Anybody feel good with a 70, right? Does tightness or torque of the fasteners in an electric vehicle matter? Does using a milliohm meter to measure voltage drop, believe it or not, with a milliohm meter on the system while it's turned off across the connection, does that matter? So how, in God's green earth, do I say that somebody got a 70 on an exam, right, is qualified? You can't. So in a performance-based testing model, the criterion for success, especially in safety-critical areas, is what number, folks? 100%. Does that mean that some people can't do that test? Yes, it does. Is that okay? Yes. And why is that okay? Because if I know that Johnny that's sitting in my class, OEM, aftermarket, wherever, right, can't do it, I either taught it wrong or I need to work with Johnny more. And if I put that assessment at the end, I'm going to never know what Johnny's skill level was, right? And who becomes the quality control, folks? The employer. You think that employer is satisfied with the school at that point? Not even close. I tell a story in 2010. When I started teaching at Suffolk Community College, I was very proud. I had my Suffolk Community College shirt on. And I go walking into a dealership. And with my wife, we were car shopping. But I said, you know what, while I'm here, it was after work, so I still had my work uniform on. I said, let me go in and see Romeo, the service manager. I haven't really met him, but I've been meaning to see him because we had some students that worked at, this was Atlantic Chevrolet in Bayshore, New York. So I walk in. And there's Romeo. And I say, Romeo, how you doing? He goes, I didn't even get my name out. And he saw my shirt. He goes, you work there? I'm like, where's this going? I'm like, yes, I work there. He goes, well, I got an issue. I'm like, what's that? He goes, all your students, they come in here, they have all these certifications, and they suck. Talk about feeling sick to your stomach about what you're doing. Folks, it's not the educator's fault. The educators are teaching to a system that's been handed to them. It's a playbook that is said, hey, follow this. This is the road to success in the automotive field. My position is we need to dump that, and we need to redefine what success is. And that's success is through skills performance, right? So how do we get to this, right? Ultimately, we look at a body of knowledge, we create industry standards, and we validate the technicians. So how that happens in the real world is we are working to certify proctors through training events and creating a certification system where whether you're a high school, college, OEM, or aftermarket training program, you can purchase vouchers, right? So essentially, when you deliver this certification, the student, or technician does not have to leave the place in which they're getting the training, right? Which means the travel time is cut down, which means I don't have two different things, right? I have to go over here for training, and then my certification is somewhere an hour or 2 hours or wherever it is away that's taking them away from the world of work for additional time. The performance-based exam is then delivered, and upon completion, we're issuing credentials that are blockchain verifiable, digital, and also in print, which means that they can't be replicated. One of the things that you're seeing happening right now, and we were just having this conversation with somebody yesterday, people stealing from online forums people's credentials because somebody posts a score report and says, hey, look at this. They download it, they take it as a PDF, they put their name on it. Canva's an amazing tool, right? So they take Canva, they put their name on the credential, and guess what? They get a job based on that credential. Now what do you think the satisfaction level of that credential is, right? So those are all the issues that we're trying to tackle with this. So basically, for a school or a training facility to do this, the instructor has to come through training. We're going to validate, which is a little bit different than current accreditation. We're going to validate that they have the facility, the vehicles, the appropriate equipment to do this, right? And do it at scale with the number of students that they have. So we do have specific lists of what is needed for each particular certification, right? And ultimately, this is something that we're rolling out here in the 2025-2026 academic year with schools. And this is really where we're starting our effort, because to deliver these at scale, you need partners that are going to be able to offer this not only to the students that are coming through their programs, but also to the local community. All right, so our rollout of this is happening over the next school year. We're taking pilot school applications. We have quite a few of them at this point. And we're having initial accreditation meetings with them in the months of May and June. We're holding multiple regional instructor training events throughout the summer with the certification program rollout this fall, and essentially continuing training happening throughout that period of time. So to get to the crux of what we're doing, it's a funny thing. Many organizations usually start certification programs, and they go out and hire someone. Usually that person's somebody like me, right, that has the ability to design a certification program, has the credentials and the understanding to be able to do that. We're doing kind of the opposite thing, right? We had sort of the idea, the plan, so we need the help and the support of the industry. So one thing that I would implore all of you to do, if this is something of interest, visit our website. We're avtec.org, avtecc.org. We can use support on the individual level, the corporate level. If this is something that you believe in what we're doing and something that kind of hit home with you, love to have a conversation with you about how to get your organizations involved. And with that, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions.
See you have a hand in the air already.
Thank you.
So, Dave, thank you for that. But, in your own school, you guys have a career day towards the end of, right, your each semester, each year.
Sure.
And the only ones invited to those career days, I'm guessing, are dealerships, correct?
No, we invite pretty much everybody that we can. But okay. I will say most of the programs, because of the OEM level of support, there's always been an emphasis on that. Yeah.
Again, again, you and I are from the same neighborhood, so to speak, right? And I own multiple shops on Long Island, and we've been benefactors of the college and all, and so with that being said, we know that 70% of the service work is being done outside of the dealer network in the independents, and with all of the kids, basically 100% of them, more or less, being routed into the dealer network. And we know that most of them are not going to make it through 3 years, and that's the problem. So I think when we talk about credentialing being the reason what's going to raise the salary of these kids, I think you have to kind of take a step back, and it's if some of those kids are routed into the independent network where they're actually put with a mentor, brought up where there's more service work being on, they're given greater opportunities. They're not going to be put into the make-ready department, because somebody else is friends with the service manager and he's getting all the gravy work. That does not go on in the independent world. These kids are given a higher level of opportunity, and I do not think they're being given a chance.
No, I think your point is valid, and I think you have to look at why are colleges doing it that way, right? So, and this is a perfect example of one of the things that we're addressing, and your points are all 100% valid. If you think about how do programs support and sustain themselves, what's the first thing that comes to mind if you're going to teach somebody how to work on a car? Got to have cars. There's something to the fact that a lot of the OEMs are providing the vehicles, but interestingly enough, in many cases, and I think many schools will tell you this, you wind up training people for other jobs and other, right? So to your point, I think there needs to be more emphasis on the aftermarket. With that, there needs to be more organization in the aftermarket to help with support and resources. So,
but I just think that if we were given the opportunity to do an exit interview on all those kids that are leaving after 3 years, I think we're going to find out that it's the flat rate piece and the way that they're handled in that world.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. And to your point too, Kevin, I think one of the things that we hear from students is that we're training them for work they're not doing. Right? So in other words, we're teaching them how to take apart an automatic transmission, and they don't touch an automatic transmission maybe ever, right? Depending on what shop they go into. So it's also looking at those things in alignment to see what do people need too. But yeah, absolutely.
Hey, thanks, some good information. How does the automotive industry compare to other skilled trades like electricians, plumbers, welders, and are there benchmark learning lessons from those other spaces?
Yeah, so for the most part, really every profession has a three-legged stool, let's call it. They have either some sort of prescriptive education, right? And that education can look different. So in the electrician's world, it might be an apprenticeship, right? There's also a structured, formalized learning model. Like to Kevin's point, like if our automotive technicians went to Kevin's shop and were mentored by, Kevin's technician, right? That's a whole lot different experience than someone going out and working at Jiffy Lube for 2 years or working at a dealer even on, service for 2 years. So I would say that the difference between those professions, and I use the term profession, right? They have a prescriptive way of bringing people into the fields, right? And not all of them, right? Everybody will say, well, what about contractors who hire sort of willy-nilly from all over the place? We as an automotive industry, I think partially to our own demise, not that I'm an advocate for licensing, but to some extent, there has to be something that is sort of the goalpost of here's what a professional technician looks like, right? And if it's voluntary, you get the results that we have, which is 80+% of our population is really uncertified, right? So do we know what their ability? Do we know what their skill level is? Welding's a good one because welding requires a performance-based certification. If you want an AWS certification or if you want a union-based job, if you want to be a ship welder or something like that, they're going to require that you go through a prescriptive educational experience that results in a skills-based certification. So there is skills-based certification being used in those fields, and for good reason. Another good example, Chris Chesney and I were talking last night about the FAA, right? Imagine pilots, right? Or even airframe mechanics, right? Airframe mechanics have to go through what type of certification? Performance-based, right? We want to make sure that when a plane lands, it lands 100% of the time. When it takes off 100% of the time, right? We have long not been I think if you talk to dealers, the dealers will say, we are concerned about fixing cars right the first time. How do you fix cars right the first time if you're not validating that the people that are doing that job can do the job?
Yeah, just a quick one. Do you foresee, as the future moves on and we go more automated vehicles, maybe even someday to that good old star in the sky, level 5, that the mechanics will have to be certified because they're now taking the full responsibility of the people in that vehicle to get them from point A to point B. Do you see where that's eventually going to have to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of people have asked also sort of similar to this, are you guys specifically focused on EV? And we're not. We're focused on the whole car. We started in the EV space for a very specific reason, and the ADAS space, I will say. And it's because I've had the ability to be involved in some interesting conversations. One was with a senator out in the state of Oregon, Senator Wyden, who before, the only thing that saved this from going to Congress was essentially the presidential debate that happened, I think, back in May or June or whatever it was. It was disastrous, right? But right before that, the week before, Senator Wyden from Oregon posted a bill that they were looking to have a mandatory certification for first responders in regard to EV. And they were looking at all the national bodies, the Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, all these different organizations to come up with a standardized certification for first responders. So to your point, Greg, one of the things that I say is, as an industry, we have to have a framework that is our choosing, right? Because if we don't have a framework that's of our choosing, we're a senator's house from burning down or an autonomous vehicle accident that's involving somebody that's a high-level member of Washington from going back to where we were in 1969 with Ralph Nader, right? And what started ASE, right? So I think that's a very valid thing that folks should be thinking about. And especially when it comes to safety critical areas, we need quality assurance. We need a third-party validation of what technicians are doing, right? One thing I did not mention, certification programs in which someone proclaims we have a certification program is not technically a certification program in the eyes of ISO or any of these credentialing bodies. Certification program is always a third party that's assessing the competency or essentially the job task analysis or the curriculum based against a standard set that's set by a panel of people across the multiple sectors of industry. And I think we've gotten complacent in our industry in self-proclaiming that we have certifications. But in the world of ISO, if someone was called to the carpet to say, is that certification hold up in a court of law? The answer would probably be very questionable. It would take some good attorneys to communicate that certification program that was self-proclaimed was valid. Right? So I think these are all topics of conversation that need to be talked about and are all things that are going to come to the forefront as we get further into advancing technology for sure.
This one will work.
Well, thank you, Dave. That was a very, very good presentation. We greatly appreciate you coming and doing that today for us.